This is MC Fireside Chats, a weekly show devoted to the outdoor hospitality industry, hosted by Brian Searl and Kara Sismadia. You'll hear from special guests that focus on topics to help your business succeed, all backed by Modern Campground, the most innovative news source in the industry.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of MC Fireside Chats. My name is Brian Searl with Insider Perks, here for our regular recurring glamping show episode that we have on the second Wednesday of every month. I'm excited to have the show. I'm not excited to be inside. It's rainy and dreary, which is really weird for Calgary because it's a dry city, and we're thankful to have the rain because the wildfires up here. But I would rather be outside, so you'll just have to look at my pretty fountain through the window and suffer with my indoor couch and background and everything else. But super excited to talk about all things glamping here. We have a couple of our recurring guests. We've got Irene Wood joining us again. We've got Connor Schwab from Sage Outdoor Hospitality. And we have David Smith from, what is the name of your company, David? You haven't been here in so long. I was about to say it, and then I don't know it anymore.
Outside Capital.
Outside. I was outside.
Thanks,
Capital.
Irene.
I knew it was outside something. All right. So David Smith is really important, but he couldn't be here for the last few weeks, so we're excited to have him back. And then we've got Annette from Rustic Rook Resort, who's one of our special guests. She's got a place that is located about 19 miles from Great Sand Dunes National Park. We were talking about this before the show, whether it just became it or didn't. But either way, it seems like a great place to be near a national park where people definitely want to go and enjoy the outdoors. And then we are super grateful to have Dimphy all the way from Romania, who owns a new quiet campsite in Romania located in, I'm not going to pronounce it right, so I'm going to let Dimphy. Let's just start with Dimphy, and she can introduce herself, and she can pronounce everything right, and then we'll know, and we can claim to have known all along.
Oh, well, I'm not sure if I'm going to pronounce it perfectly because I'm from the Netherlands and I'm having a campsite in Romania. Okay. So when I ever pronounce a Romanian word, it's not completely correct. So I will first say how I would describe the name in the Netherlands, Valea Schailor. And when I do it in Romania, Valea Schailor. So it's a bit different.
Still better than an American or Canadian would pronounce it, probably. So, but go ahead. Yeah. Tell us a little bit about your campsite, and just introduce yourself briefly, right? And then we'll go around the room. I want to have Annette introduce yourself.
Yeah, I've recently started a campsite in Romania because we moved to Romania because of my husband's work, and it always had been a dream for me to have a campsite. And the first year that we were living in Romania, we went around with a RV to see the places, and in this area we could not find the campsite, but we did want to stay over because it's a wine area. So we wanted to do a wine tasting and stay in this area, the wine tasting was possible, but staying on a campsite was not possible yet. So since then we've been developing it, and it was my dream to have a campsite. Well, when I spoke to local people saying that I wanted to start a campsite, many of them said they didn't own an RV or a tent. So then I also came up with the idea of starting a glamping, and that's really new here for Romania. In the Netherlands, it's well known, but in Romania, it's pretty new. So I started that, and I just put it on booking.com, and within 12 hours, I've got my first booking. So we're very, very close to the capital of Bucharest. Bucharest, that's the capital of Romania, and it's only 50 miles away. So many people that live in the capital come to visit our glamping during the weekend. So it's been a success since we started.
I like how you said miles, because I'm still getting used to kilometers and everywhere else. So
I looked it up front for the show.
It's a nod to all the Americans on the show, right? So I appreciate that. Annette, do you want to introduce yourself real quick and talk about Rustic Rook?
Sure, yeah. My name's Annette. I'm with Rustic Rook Resort. We started up in 2020. We're also a Glampground. We're in Moscow, Colorado. And as you mentioned, we're 19 miles from the Great Sand Dunes National Park. So we've got 30 glamping tents. They're kind of just like hunting style wall tents on wooden platforms. They're fully furnished. They're all facing the dunes and the mountains. We're also in the largest alpine valley in the world, San Luis Valley. So we've got beautiful views of 3 different mountain ranges here. So we've been having a great time hosting people since 2020 and hoping for another good 4th season.
Can't really complain about views like that for sure when you're going to work every day there. So
not at all.
Connor and Irene and David. Well, let's let David go. David, do you want to introduce yourself again, since you haven't been on here in a little bit? And then is there anything new in your world, David, since we hadn't had you on in a couple of weeks, that you feel like we should be talking about?
Sure. Yeah. David Smith, as Irene so kindly introduced our company. I'm the founder of a platform called Outside Capital, which is an investment management company focused specifically on what we call outdoor hospitality, which we define as spanning everything from glamping to new age campgrounds and RV parks to other more traditional forms of nature-based hotels and hospitality. We started the platform about a year ago. My background is primarily on the finance and real estate side of the hotel business, but have always been a passionate outdoors person and really fascinated and inspired by the growth of this alternative glamping outdoor hospitality industry. So our mission at Outside Capital is to try and tackle what we think is probably one of the biggest barriers, at least, to the ongoing growth of this industry, which is the availability of capital, financial capital to do deals. And so we've got dedicated capital sources. We serve as partners to sponsors and entrepreneurs in the space. And then we also sponsor our own projects around the country. So I'm based in Los Angeles. We've probably, compared to last year, we've spent a little more time closer to home the first 6 months of 2023, which has been really nice for me. A little bit less time on airplanes and a lot more time driving up and down the 101 here in California.
It's on my bucket list. I haven't been there yet, but it's on my bucket list.
Yeah, it's a beautiful state, and we're blessed with proximity to the beaches, the mountains, the desert, wine country, and everything else in between. So,
well, I've been to California. I just haven't been up and down. The 101 is the coastal highway, right?
It's right up against the coast for parts of it, and then it's a little bit further inland on other parts. But you're probably thinking of the California Highway one is the Pacific.
That's the one. Because
really
I wanted to drive up to the Monterey Bay Aquarium there. But anyway, continue. I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's it. So we're spending most of our time at the moment on a few projects we're working on here in California, in the Central Coast, in the Northern California wine country, and we're seeing a ton of growth around the rest of the country. Definitely, 2023 feels very different to 2022 so far in terms of the overall availability of capital, and anyone who's tried to take out a bank loan this year will know that it's a lot harder to do and it's a lot more expensive. So we're trying our best to kind of fill in what we think is a pretty big gap in the market for this sort of stuff, and having a lot of fun doing it.
So for sure, I definitely want to deep dive with you in that a little bit later in the show, especially since it's been a couple months since you've been on, and just see how that climate has changed and what what you feel alternatives are for people and how your firm is helping, for sure. I want to make sure we give our special guests enough time here in the beginning too. But before we do, Connor, Irene, is there anything on your plate that's come across your desk from a glamping perspective that you feel is, we have to talk about this, we can't miss it?
Connor, I'll let you go first. Age before beauty.
No pressure.
Let's see. Yeah, put me on the spot there, Brian. Let's see. Trying to think of.
I mean, you can just say no. There's nothing, Brian. That's allowed.
Let me think on that for a minute.
All right, you think? Go ahead, Irene.
Brian, I would just say that there's been, and for whatever reason, it feels like, and Connor, you could probably say that there's just been a ton of articles that have come out in probably the last 30 days as it relates to whether they're international or also national publications that are talking a lot about this industry, some of the trends that they're seeing. There was a huge article that came out of, and maybe you were the one to highlight it, but out of Africa, some of the trends that they initially saw, owner operated, that segment, and how that segment is still staying true to owner operated and not really getting picked up in a huge roll up. So there's just been a lot of data and conversation out there and publication. I'm sure you probably share it, but because it seems like there's more of it in the last 30 days than I've ever seen before, it just is a lot of really good reading out there right now.
Yeah, I mean, I would love to take credit for that, but that's for sure my team at Modern Campground who does all that. So that's, Akari and Shara and Mao and Rain, our writers. But yeah, we do our best to, we're trying to expand and cover as much as we can in all different places of the globe. But I think that's, and maybe you can speak to that a little bit, David, real quick before we get to our special guest. But I think that's kind of the way investment works from a roll-up standpoint, right? I think it has to start with the small mom and pops to develop the market in most cases. And then once the market's there, then the bigger boys come in and are attracted.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that. I agree with what you said, Brian.
Go ahead, Connor. Sorry.
Yeah, I agree. And one of the things I was going to say is that we're kind of seeing the tip of the spear, I think, particularly in the RV segment. And a lot of people are interested in doing this in the glamping segment, but the market just isn't mature enough. There's not enough businesses that have stabilized for any sort of roll-up strategy in the glamping space. But what we're seeing in the RV and campground space is it's starting to get a little bit more institutional and sophisticated. And I think I think what we're going to see in the RV and campground space is it's starting to follow the hotel industry. And we're just seeing the tip of the spear with that. And that essentially means more technology for dynamic pricing, reservation systems, marketing and advertising are some of the big things. Something of a star report, which is what our company is really working on, kind of tracking the data to give people better investment data. So I totally agree with everything you guys said.
All right, I definitely want to dive into that a little bit later in the show, but I want to make sure we get to our special guest. So can we start with Annette from Rustic Rook Resort? So Great Sand Dunes National Park. Where is that? I don't even know. I feel like I should know. I've been literally everywhere in America for 6 years building the company, driving all over the place, and I can't picture in my head where that is.
So it's kind of south central Colorado. We're about 2 hours from the New Mexico border.
Okay. I was hoping it was New Mexico because we have been to White Sands National Monument.
Okay.
So I was thinking like the only two dunes I can really picture in my head are New Mexico and way up in Michigan by Traverse City.
I think we're about maybe 5 to 6 hours from the White Sand Dunes National Park. I've not been there yet, but it's on my list.
Yeah, I took my stepdaughter there years ago to go sledding down the dunes. It was great.
Yeah, and we do that here too. So that's another thing. We rent sleds out. So it's a super family-friendly national park, as I'm sure the White Sand Dunes are too. It's just you don't have to worry about if you have little kids that they're going to fall off a cliff, which is comforting to parents.
Yeah, I feel like that would be comforting to a parent. Yeah, it makes sense. You should use that in your marketing.
Right.
But, so tell us a little bit about Rustic Rook Resort. How did you get started? What's it all about?
Sure. So we kind of we moved from Illinois, the Flatlands, about 6 years ago, and we didn't really know what we were going to do, but we knew we wanted to do something campground-like in Colorado. We'd always loved Colorado, and my husband's sister-in-law moved there, and we went out to see her, and she's like, well, all the campgrounds in Colorado, or I guess the ones she likes, they're booked, pretty much during the winter. And we thought, wow, that there's that much demand here. So that kind of sparked some interest. And my husband and I, we owned a painting company, and my husband didn't want to leave his dad with the painting company all by himself because he was getting older. And then they decided they were moving to Tennessee. So that they left us, and that kind of opened it up. So we sold everything, packed everything up, and we bought a camper and just kind of did like a big 2 or 3 month kind of tour of America to kind of see what was out there and just really learn what we might want to do. And then we settled in Colorado Springs, kind of started life again, started real jobs, got the money flowing in again. And then we just started looking around, and within about 2 years, we settled on this area. It just, there wasn't a lot of competition. There was demand, but just not enough places to stay. There was no glamping. There was already primitive sites. There was already RV sites, but nothing glamping. So we decided on glamping, and then we started construction in February of 2019 after getting like our permitting and all that lined up. My husband and I both have construction background, so he was kind of the superintendent on the ground, and then I was sort of like project manager, ordering, purchasing stuff and everything. And then I joined him when we were getting close to opening, and I hadn't planned on quitting my normal job because I didn't know if I'd be able to, but the first camp host team we had didn't work out. So I had no other choice and I had to just do it, and it ended up working out. So we survived, and it was rough opening in 2020, but we made it. And the scariest part was our loan almost didn't close because the payment protection loans were out. And we'd already started construction and already had contractors to pay. So that was pretty terrifying, but it did barely squeak by, and we made it through the year. And even though it was a weird year, but yeah, we've enjoyed it out here, and people, it's really, really fun. We love seeing all the families have a good time and have, little 2-year-olds who've never had a s'more before get their first s'more and just enjoy the area. So it's been a really great experience so far, not without challenges, but I guess if it was easy, everybody would do it.
Oh yeah, and the challenges always make you better, right? With any business that you're starting. So, I mean, David, Irene, well, all of us know that, right? So, what interests me here, and maybe you guys can speak to this a little bit, is specifically what Annette said, and we've talked about this on the show before. If you look at the way, and we just did briefly, right? Glamping has taken off so fast in this country, despite, it's been established for a long time or longer in the UK and Netherlands, as Dimphy said. But I feel like this is a common refrain, right? So Annette, when you were starting this in 2019, 2020, as you said, there was basically nobody doing glamping around the Colorado Springs area that you were aware of. What do you think now?
Well, we didn't look so much in Colorado Springs. So we're about we're about 3 hours.
Yeah, so I apologize, but where you are now, that's what I meant.
Yeah, well, right now, I feel like 2021 sort of alerted people a little bit, I guess, falsely, that the camping industry is huge, and it is big, but it's not 2021 big. So we've gotten a big influx of people that want to basically come. Like if I had a dollar for every person that came here and said, I want to do what you're doing, I'd have a lot of dollars. So many people want to do it now. They almost think it's the new get rich quick scheme. And it's certainly not that. It's so much work. It's so stressful. It has its moments where it's great.
But I saw a YouTube video where I could make $1 million overnight, Annette.
Yeah, it was so easy and everything was perfect, and it always sunshine. So we've actually I think we've got 3 approved Glampgrounds, because I'm on the planning committee also in our county. We've got 3 of them approved to build, and I don't know if they all will build, but I do know if they all do build, they won't all make it, because there's definitely not enough inventory to go around to 3 new places, because that would probably triple the inventory we have now. So it's a little concerning. And like I said, just because they're approved to build doesn't mean they will. But I do think 2020 was a false high, and we have to kind of get a grasp on what the demand really is moving forward.
So this is an interesting topic, and maybe Connor, you can speak to this, right? Because we've talked about this before. Like, I think we're mostly all in agreement here that 2021, even into a little bit into 2022, is kind of an outlier. But is that market really not there, or is it just shifting, and will it come back, or will it, I don't think we're ever going to have a blowout year like 2021 and 2022 again, as far as percentage up over year before, right? But I do think there's more of an audience there, and it's growing every month, every year, who are interested in glamping and alternative accommodations. So can we get back to that level even without that percentage increase eventually?
My understanding, I think the big question is, how is 2022 and 2023 compared to 2019 is kind of the big question to tell you the more normalized, trend line of the industry. And my sense in speaking with owners is that it is. Again, there's not that many glamp sites that, had a normal year in 2019 and have that many years of operational history to see that trend line. But my sense is 2022 and 2023 will be above 2019 is kind of, but I would be curious from Irene or David, from what you're seeing in the market in terms of looking at any historicals, if you think that's the case as well.
You are right. And I want David and Irene to answer that briefly, but you are right. There's less history in the glamping market of 2019 than there is with RV and campgrounds to compare with. So anything to add, David and Irene?
Well, I can talk about it because I was operating in 2019 and I'm operating in 2023. And, I think, Annette, I can empathize with what you look at. I sit on a planning commission too. I work with zoning, helping people talk about, how to get their space, special use permits. I'm seeing national brands move into the area. I'm seeing national brands struggle in the area. So it's really interesting to see, I'll just start with, 2020, 2021, and a little bit of even 2022, we weren't back to normal travel. People were still keeping their kids from school. You had a longer travel season. I think anybody that sits in seasonality is looking back at the seasonality and occupancy rates that they saw 2019, right? The typical, like I'll use Michigan, for example, there's absolutely zero limited travel in April, May. And then June, once kids get out of school, you ramp up the travel season, and then it kind of quiets back down into September and October. One of the advantages that I think the fields had was we established a brand, not necessarily just accommodation. So for those that were able to establish a lifestyle brand, they were able to establish revenue in different areas and streams and kind of curate and become first to market, which I think perhaps gives the fields an advantage over some of the other ones that I'm seeing that are in the area that are already for sale.
Established brand.
I think also I would tell you, I take no less than half a dozen calls a week from brokers that are trying to get me to purchase somebody else's glamping operation and take it over. And I would have said those calls started at the end of middle of last year, and they've really ramped up in Q1 and are going into Q2 at a discounted rate. I get nervous for the industry, for those that didn't establish brands, invested a ton of money, have high cap rates, trying to make their payments, didn't kind of take it incrementally, because now they're looking at, variable rates at the 6 and 7%. And that's just really expensive, and probably weren't costed into the project with occupancy rates of 2019. But I think the full picture won't come until the end of quarter, third quarter, where the season's kind of wrapped up and everybody looked around and went, okay, who made it and who didn't? And sadly, I think it's because, to the thing that Annette's talking about, lots of people wanted to open up, ramp up, and they're price gouging because they just have to make basic payments because they can't pay the bank. And what that's happening is it's causing other businesses to perhaps lower their pricing. And then some are just getting washed out because they just didn't establish the brand fast enough.
We have the economic headwinds too that we're all dealing with and may or may not get worse.
Yes, but here's the interesting area that I'm seeing, and Connor, maybe you could speak to it, or even David. A lot of them, because they were plumbed as, like I'll use the fields, for example, we were plumbed and we could be an RV park. RV parks are still blowing it out. I mean, there's still the 3 RV parks that are in the location closest to me are adding slots, and they're already filled. So it's like, did they ride the wave and the trend of the term glamping? And then everybody kind of went, well, that was fun, that we played that game for a little bit. We're going to head back to the RV park. So,
right, we're gonna have a cliffhanger there, right? Because I want to give Dimphy a chance to talk about her business, because she's kind enough, as you can see, to join us during the evening hours there.
Yes.
So Dimphy, can you tell us a little bit about what you've got going on in Romania, and then we'll get back to that, because that's a really interesting discussion too.
Yeah, I only started the campsite last summer, so 2022, so I cannot reflect on 2019. But what I can see is that compared to last year, we opened only in June, and now I could open already in May because we didn't have any constructions going on anymore. So for me, it's already a better season than last year because I have a longer term. But what I wanted to share about Romania, since it's in the east part of Europe, I get lots of different people from different nationality all over Europe. And I think that is the most fun part and also interesting part about running a campsite or glamping. I have both. So at the moment, I have people in an RV, and in the weekend, I will have glamping tents full. So during the week, I see people coming by with RVs that do a tour around Europe. And in the weekends, I have mostly guests from the big city nearby. But what's most fun is the different kind of cultures, because we're in the east of Europe, but when people come from the west of Europe, they have a different approach about camping. And for example, when I look at my reviews, I've got some reviews from German people, and if German people say it's a good campsite, then all the other people in Europe know that it's a clean campsite. So for somebody that has a campsite or a glamping in Europe, they have to get good reviews from German people, and then other people will also join the campsite. I just wanted to share that nationalities.
So is the strategy then just open and then give a discount to all the Germans to come there?
That could be a strategy. Yeah.
I mean, it sounds like it would work. So I'm fascinated by, like, I really want to explore more of Europe. I went over there in December of last year. I didn't get as far as Bucharest. You said you're outside of, right? But I did go to France and Germany and Belgium and the Netherlands too. I went to Amsterdam for a couple of days just to see the Christmas markets and stuff. But It's something that just building my business, I haven't had time to do. So it fascinates me when we have European guests on to talk about the culture and what we found, I think, through the people we've had on the show, is that the camping, glamping market is very similar over there as far as the ups and downs and the economy and the way people behave. So I'd love to hear more of your take on, have you done a lot of research on the differences between the States and over there, or?
No, not the different countries, but I mostly compare what I see in the Netherlands. Like in the Netherlands, if you have glamping, you really have to have a tent with a kitchen, with a shower. That's called glamping. However, Romania being on the total other side of Europe, if I have a tent with a bed, it's already glamping. So it really depends if you're on the west side of Europe, how far it's been evolved compared to the east side of Europe. So you see, I think also Romania is a neighbor country of Moldavia and Ukraine. With the war in Ukraine last year, many other campsites saw a decrease in visitors because it's so close to Ukraine. Since I started, I didn't see that going down. So I think, yes, in general, you see the same picture in the Netherlands, Belgium, France, and Italy and Germany, because those are countries that have been there have been campsite and glamping for a long time. But the countries around it, they have more ups and downs and differences within the countries.
But this is just primarily, I think, an establishment thing is what you're saying. So the longer it goes in Romania, the more it will catch up to the West might be even further ahead then, right? But from a time perspective.
Yes, exactly.
Okay. Guys, any questions for Dimphy? We've got a wide open resource here for Europe and Romania. I think it's fascinating to do some comparisons to. Connor, David, Irene, Annette, even. You're just gonna
what are you finding? What are you finding that guests are most excited about, or if you were to redevelop your property now that you have a season under your belt, is there anything that you would have changed, like with bathrooms or with food or anything like that, or amenities?
Yeah, what I find is that my facilities are good. People are surprised how good it is. However, it's very hilly because it's in a wine area. And I want to have flat spaces. But when I try to explain that to the local people, that we need RVs and I need to have like flat spaces for the RVs to park, they really didn't understand. So I tried it this summer again, and now I have some flat spaces, but they are too small. So when people come with an RV, they still park it on the not so flat spaces to get them flat again. So that's something for next year. I want more flat spaces so that I can have more RVs, but also the climate change is really noticeable here as well. I have a drill in the ground that supplies me for water, but it's just not enough for when my campsite is completely full. So I try to get a connection with the water company, but also the water company doesn't always have water. So the village near my campsite sometimes for 2 or 3 days doesn't have water. So that's also something for next winter. I need to prepare to have more water and to see how I get that.
Now, when you talk about the paved campsites and getting approval, this is what it sounds like, right? Is that a planning issue? Is that you have to go and convince them, or is it?
No. I have a local mayor and he likes everything. He's fine with everything. Also, I don't have to pay tourist tax in the village. The local council can decide. And in this village, we don't have to pay tourist tax. So I'm really happy with that.
Be careful. Everybody from America is about to come over there and open a glamping place.
Yeah, they could. Well, it's in Europe, so Americans are not allowed to buy land, I think, in Romania. So
okay,
that might be a bit
safe then. All right.
But no, if I tell the local workers that build everything here, they don't understand why I want it flat and how how large it need to be. So when I ask them to make something of beton or cement, they can do it. But when I just ask them to make the ground flat, they don't understand why and how big it has to be. So that's something I need to spend more time on for this winter.
Where do you see yourself, like in an ideal world, being in 5 years with your campsite?
Well, at the moment we have 30,000 square meters, and I have only like 20 to 30 guests, and that's what I like, because I want people to have privacy, and that is also calm, and people can really relax. So I don't think I want to change that much. I just want to be more flexible in having different kind of customers. As I see it now, the weekends the glamping tents are full, but during the week I would like to have more people with RVs or with their own tents. So just the flexibility to get more different kind of guests, and in the end more guests. That's what I would like to see in a few years.
Awesome. Well, thank you. And please feel free to stay on if you want, or you can leave because it's late at night. It's up to you. But the last question I want to ask you before you go is just, and I'm trying to pivot back to the discussion we had, right, with finances and the change in behavior and whether businesses are going to succeed or not. Have you seen that kind of economic climate over in Europe as well?
Yes. The inflation is really, really high, and especially in Romania. If I look at the local economy, the differences between the people that have a normal job and the people that have like a good paying job is only increasing. So the kind of project that I'm doing now will become less and less affordable to the general Romanian. And I try to invest as much as possible in local people, but I see the gap growing. And I hope if I maybe ever need to leave Romania, or if I need to sell it, I would like to be able to sell it to local people that can then take it as a business. But it seems more difficult.
All right. Well, let's open this store, guys. Irene, I think pitched. Do you want to repeat your question, Irene? Just to David and Connor, you'd asked them to weigh in on, I think, the people surviving through September, I believe.
Well, that's the doom and gloom. No, but I wondered if, they're seeing some of the same things that I'm seeing, or getting approached. I mean, again, maybe it could just be the natural volume of glamping operations have kind of come to the 3 to 5 year time horizon where people are wanting to figure out what their exit looks like. Or are you finding those that were like, hey, listen, we did this thinking that from a financing perspective, we were going to do it, with a variable rate. And now we're sitting in a position where just the numbers just don't make sense like they did in 2018, 2019. We're getting ready to, unload and move on to something else, another investment that may be, owner operated is a little bit of a different investment than perhaps somebody who looked at it as if it was a financial investment.
Yeah, I mean, just to add my 2 cents to that topic. I mean, there's so many layers to that, Irene. There's interest rates. What do you do if you're in a floating rate loan? And it doesn't really matter where you are in the real estate world. Even in multifamily apartment buildings, which have long been thought of as the most blue chip, rock solid food group in the real estate world. Plenty of folks in that business have been, kind of blown up really in the last year because, businesses were over levered, rates went up, and, people can't afford debt service anymore. In the hotel industry, it's the same story. The fundamentals in the hotel industry are still really strong. Travel is looking good. There's real constraints on new supply now. But again, that doesn't really matter if, your debt service costs have doubled or tripled just because you were on a floating rate loan and you had too much leverage. So I think there's some element to what's happened in the world in the last year that's sort of affecting everyone in this, real estate ecosystem, regardless of whether you are, glamping or camping or hotel or whatever. In glamping, there's other layers to it. Clearly, the barriers to entry are to creating a new glamping business are a lot lower than building a new hotel. And I think, Irene, as you've seen or described, I think that dynamic is played out in a lot of other markets where there's probably a lot of folks who have come into the space, and didn't really have like a business model that could necessarily survive like this higher interest rate environment. And then on top of all of that, we've just got, this other dynamic at play now, which is that, as you talked about before, Connor, demand is softening in certain parts of our industry, and I think that shouldn't really be a surprise, right? We all, as you guys have said, I think everyone who had thought about this carefully probably recognized that 2021 may not have been, the best year to set your expectations to. So I think there's a lot of, we are at an interesting point now, but I think from my point of view, it's kind of the same thing that I've been saying about glamping for probably 2 years, which is that this space is new. There's a lot of really fantastic reasons to be excited about it. But we are quickly exiting the period of the glamping business where just being a novelty is enough, in my point of view. And I think that the folks that are going to succeed from here on out are the folks that are building resilient businesses that are, built for a normal cycle and not for, the kind of sort of feverish and hopefully once in a lifetime type situation that we're all living in 2020, 2021.
Well, and that's where everything goes, right? Like every
Right.
single business goes that way. It's the people who are patient, who build something, who research it, who brand it like Irene has, who are the ones who will succeed long term. It's never the people who just rush into the gold mine and then rush into the next thing and rush into the
right. Yep, exactly. And I think that's where we are now. But look, I also, let's not lose sight of the positives, which are that I think what's happening in this space is becoming more and more relevant with every passing day. I think, you think about what's going on this year, the development of AI technology, the digital world. I'm more convinced than ever that we are looking at a future where genuine connections with the natural, tangible world are going to become more and more valuable to people. And I think people who are building great experiences that allow folks to connect with the outdoors are going to be the winners in this next era in the tourism cycle. I just think that we have to, we've sort of exited the phase where, like the half-baked business plan is okay because there's nowhere else for people to go. We're entering into a new normal now. People are able to travel in Italy again for the summer if they want to, and they're financially inclined to do so. So the requirement to build a durable business is that's coming more and more into focus. But I think the long-term story, the demand story behind this space is stronger than ever.
I have a little bit to add to this, if I may.
Yeah, go ahead.
As far as just from my perspective and what we've dealt with, I think another reason people decide to sell, they have this dream of doing this. They don't foresee it's rose-colored glasses. So they're just thinking of all the awesome stuff that's going to happen and all the happy guests and all the great employees and all the beautiful weather and all the money. They're thinking of that. And then when reality strikes and it's raining and all their employees quit, and they've got a rotten egg to deal with, with an employee to fire, and they've got unhappy guests because they saw a spider, and all those things pile up. All of a sudden they realize this isn't fun anymore. I came here to have fun. I don't want to do this anymore. I just want out. And pretty much every year we go through about a month where we want to sell it too. We haven't, but I get the sentiment. So I think that happens when we operate your own business. The honeymoon phase leaves and you realize it's not all fun and games.
Yeah, I think that's something every business owner goes through, right? When at the beginning, like, it was so long ago and I'm so old that my memory's faded and I don't remember it, but I'm sure at some point I went through that phase, right? When I was starting Insider Perks. But that I think everything's going to be perfect because that's what you see on, Instagram and social media and YouTube and everywhere else. Just start a business and all of a sudden you'll have a private jet and everything will be wonderful and you'll make billions of dollars and it's for the very reason that we talked about before. It's not all roses. Like it can be at the end or even a lot of the times during the path, but you have to be willing to take the punches along with the roses.
Brian, I think me and Annette need to start a support group. It's like the owner-operated support group. Like, what was the craziest thing that happened this week? And because, it's interesting. That's one of the things that, and actually, I'm going to find this article and I'm going to share it with you all because, David, you hit the nail on the head. Really what it boiled down to was in these areas that saw this massive growth. Really what has stood the test of time has been incredibly hospitable owner operators, right? That built the business because they built the business for them and a lifestyle that they wanted to live. And then what they did was they said, okay, this is what I'm going to do the very best that I can. It's going to be mine. I'm going to own it and hand it on to the next generation. And those are the ones that 40, 60 years later are still the ones that are in operation. Because, and again, to Brian, probably Connor, everybody's point, starting a business is nerve-wracking, whether it's investment, it's consulting, it's all nerve-wracking because you're putting your whole heart on the line. I think, but when you're responsible from a hospitality standpoint, and Annette, I'm sure, I really
more pressure.
It is because you have somebody that's already paid for the performance. They've paid for a percepted performance, and you have to deliver for that, and you have elements that you cannot, that you can plan for, but you cannot predict. Weather, spider. I had a woman this week. I'm just going to tell you the story. It's hilarious and you'll laugh.
I was going to ask you. You're talking about every crazy week. I want to hear your crazy week.
Yeah. So this was her. And I'm deathly afraid of snakes. I know this is the running joke, but I think everybody's heard my story about the snakes. And she was laying in her bed and she said to herself, I bet today when I walk out of this tent, I'm going to see a snake. And it was like she was Harry Potter and willed a snake. So she comes in and she's like, Irene, you're not going to believe this. I stepped out of my tent and there was a snake. And of course, there's nothing worse than hearing a guest say that. Yet you're in nature. We have nothing poisonous, all those things. But I thought, God damn it. Today's a snake. Tomorrow's a spider. The next day it's the snapping turtle. The day after that, it's a locust swarm following a weather, tornado warnings. It's like, is there anything that's easy about outdoor hospitality? No.
How many locust swarms do you have?
Well, so this year and next year are supposed to be the major hatches.
Okay.
You know how they have them like every 7, 17, 13?
Not really. That's why I asked. Like, I'm just familiar from when I was a kid and my mom made me go to church and I heard about the locust swarm, like all that. So,
Brian, I'm going to tell you, when you have an outdoor hospitality and your business is dependent on it, you become a meteorologist, a psychologist.
This is why, I'm just a marketer. I'm not smart enough or brave enough or whatever to own. No.
You could totally do it. Anybody could do it. It's just ours.
No, anybody cannot do it.
Yeah.
I think that's inaccurate. But
I'd be really curious to hear the group's perspective on market saturation and glamping. And Irene, I know you were the first mover in your market, and it sounds kind of like you were as well. And there's been a lot popping up. Some have faltered. And we get that question a lot from investors or banks, like, "Oh, is this market saturated with glamping resorts?" And I'd just be curious what everyone else's perspective is on that.
Sure, I've got a little bit to say about that. So, as you heard already, I do feel like our market has the possibility to be saturated if everybody opens, and I'm really concerned about that because we put everything on the line to open this and blah, blah, blah. But so it was a big concern when the Planning Commission just kept on being like, yeah, everybody come on. There's room for all the glamping. Like, there's not room for all the glamping. So what I did is I kind of contacted all of the RV parks and everyone that was a kind of core existing business out here and just talk to them and be like, hey, are you guys aware this is happening? What are your thoughts on this? We just kind of all talked about how 2021 was an anomaly and everybody was kind of seeing 2019 numbers, even though I didn't have a 2019, but I knew it was lower than 2020. So we all kind of just got together and we talked to the Planning Commission and the county commissioners and just kind of told them, sorry, there's a gnat bothering me. And just kind of told them our concerns. And so what we started doing is collecting data. So we pay a marketing tax here. It's 4% and it pays for marketing. I don't know how well it works, but they pay for it. And so we've got people employed in our county to try to get more people to come here. Well, now they're collecting data on the campgrounds. And initially they just collected it on hotels. So if the Planning Commission said, hey, how's our demand for glamping or camping or RV parks, they initially didn't know. And I'm like, well, you can't just keep approving these places if you don't know, because how are people supposed to do market research and, know whether their business can survive and know whether, another one should be approved. So we're starting to collect data on all the campgrounds on occupancy rates. So now if another campground wants to come in, we'll see like, okay, everybody's at about 50%. We probably shouldn't approve another one. So that's kind of how we're trying to curb it here to make it sustainable and make it so that the businesses that are here will survive, instead of letting so many places just start and then, someone's going to fail. And we don't want failed businesses, because that just leaves, it looks bad, and, it's not good for business, and good for the county, and good for taxes, and all of that. So we've definitely seen, we're tracking that, and we would definitely say that it's similar to a 2019 year. And I mean, who knows how this year is going to be. It's too early to tell, but I think that I'm glad that we all got together and talked and let the county know how we felt about it. And it did make a difference, because right now they're not approving any new ones until we kind of get another, get a temperature on it.
It's an interesting.
Did you say this is your local tourism and like economic board in the county or the city?
Yeah, the county. Yeah. So they're collecting that data. It's private. We get to see it, the people that participate in it. And then they'll also provide it to the county commissioners and the planning department when requested.
That's super interesting. So all the overnight lodging hospitality businesses in the area are reporting and sending that data?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. That's quite a collective.
Different, right? Yeah. Well, it's a small area. So we probably have 10 indoor lodging places and 5 to 7 campgrounds. So it's not a huge task force for it.
God.
Connor, what's your answer to that question when the bank comes knocking? Is it just market by market?
It is. I mean, so it depends on a couple main things. Like, is there a big demand generator in the area, right?
Mm-hmm.
Are you next to a really popular city, a really popular touristy city or tourist destination, or a national park, or next to like a major highway or on a major trafficked route? So those are kind of the main things we look at on the demand side. And then we look at the supply side as well. I typically say that there's very few saturated markets for glamping in the US, because the representation of glamping units relative to campsites, RV sites, and hotels is still a percent of a percent of a percent. Like it's so much smaller that I think people continuing to look for a unique nature-based experience, like a glamping experience, I think that segment's going to continue to grow with supply. So I can only think of maybe 2, maybe 3 markets that are like might be nearing saturation in my opinion, but I'm curious to hear what other people think about that.
I mean, I think it's interesting from our perspective, briefly, just from a marketing standpoint, right? And from what the other guests have talked about, I think there's so many different factors that are influencing this either saturation or not saturation. And you're right, there are some markets who are probably getting close, right? But I think it's a question of, is it saturated or are they not marketed right? Are they right? Because if you look at the demand generation, like you're talking about, if we're talking to a potential client who wants us to market their campground or their glamping resort or whatever else, then that's what we're looking at to run Google Ads or do SEO on their website, is what's nearby that someone is already coming to the area to see. Is it a national park? Is it a river? Is it a city? Is it a highway? Is it whatever? And then we're looking at that demand for related keywords on Google already to see how many people are searching for it and looking for it. And I think with glamping, that demand is in some ways both camping and the conversion from, or the upscaling from camping cabins or deluxe cabins, and then also how many can we pull from the demand of the hotel market nearby. But I think a lot of people don't do that marketing, for one, because it's really complex. It's really complicated, right? Or even know it exists or aren't willing to spend on it. But then in combination with all the other factors we're talking outside of marketing, it really kind of is a muddy picture to see. Like, I think what Irene's saying is very true. I think we're going to have to just see in September.
Yeah, I'll give you just a couple tidbits. So in South Haven, in our area, we pay a VAT tax. That VAT tax goes into, it's 5%. It gets pooled with all the other accommodations. There's no exclusion. If you have 9 rooms or more, you pay a VAT tax. So we have access to a lot of that data. I will tell you, while you were chatting, Connor, there were 2 things, and I just wondered if you consider them as you're having some of the analysis done. we talk about opportunity cost, right? So the reality is for an outdoor hospitality business, most of them do not most. Well, yeah, most of them do not run a full season for a lot of reasons. Zoning doesn't permit it. We'll just use in Michigan. You get 180 days of operation. So your business model has to be run during that time. Obviously, in order for the business model to make sense, your pricing has to be adjusted accordingly. And to add to that, some of the things that you want to make sure is your guest is choosing you based on the experience and not necessarily on the price. So Brian, nothing would be worse than me having somebody show up to a campsite because they've selected on price and then they've come in expecting that they were having a microwave and something else because they were choosing to stay at a hotel. So there's kind of that.
But there's the marketing, right? You have to set expectations appropriately.
You do, but then you also have to price in a way that has your consumer choosing based on that as well. So I think I'll use just kind of in terms of marketing, and Getaway's not here, so they can't represent themselves, but I'll use Getaway as an example because they're 15 miles from us. And, their team, when you grow up in an area and you're very familiar with the area, oftentimes you work with some of the people that are running some other businesses. So you're just intermingling and talking about business. But you'd be remiss not to see some of their marketing right now where they're discounting everything at 45%. So the occupancy in their locations is like abysmal. And some of it could be pricing, some of it could be location. But when you look at a saturation of a market, I don't think it's necessarily a saturation of a market. It could just be the wrong product in the market. So that's where sometimes the thought that you can just plant any product in any market sometimes doesn't make sense because the market, when you look at the market research, does the market demand itself to have an owner operator or is it looking for a big box to come in because that's what the consumer is conditioned for? So I would say in the area that I'm in, most certainly I would argue that the consumer is conditioned to look for the owner operator, not the national brand, right? But I would say maybe if you're going to a national park, they would most certainly want to be looking for a national brand because the way that they're looking for it a little bit more nationally. Just some things in terms of.
Yeah, you're not wrong. And so then I think it's also easier in an up economy, which we're not heading into, to recondition people too. Whereas in a down economy, it's a lot harder to do that. You definitely want to start with a base as high as you can.
Yeah.
There is some reconditioning that can go on, I think, when more people are on the road and traveling.
Yeah.
And I think, Irene, just thinking about your property as well, I think you touched on an important point as well, which is that I think, tell me if you disagree with this, but I would think that, your property, Fields of Michigan, induces so much of its demand because you've created something special that people
created a brand.
Make an effort to go and visit, even if they weren't otherwise thinking about going to South Haven necessarily.
Correct.
That thinking about, saturation, I think is a really important topic, for anyone to think about if they are embarking on a new business venture. But I also think that, it's not complete. I don't think it's the wrong question, but I think for some properties, it may not be entirely the right question because you've got to this is not like, we all know that this space it's not by definition, it's not a commodity. It's not like adding, one more or 10 more RV bays in a market that's already got 1,000. And you've got to figure out do we need 1,010 or is 1,000 too much? So many of the successful businesses in this space are doing something that is by definition completely new, even if it is, even if there's other glamping supply there. What you offer, Irene, is a very different experience to what the Getaway in your market offers. And so, I almost think trying to do a saturation calculation is maybe not entirely the right question if you are offering something that is so differentiated and speaks so much to what people want, even if they don't know that they want it yet, that you can kind of almost transcend the whole question of, are there too many units already in my market?
You're right. Saturation is absolutely the wrong question because you look at whatever business you're talking about, saturation comes from mediocrity or being average. There is always the opportunity to come in and invent something new, whether it's the iPhone in 2008 or whatever glamping site you're starting in 2023. If you can give people an experience that you can wrap a brand around and sell to them, you can succeed.
You know, I would say I love when competition comes in. I always say competition sharpens knives. I mean, it really does. And I love it. I'm like, it just has me kind of getting really comfortable, putting the blinders on and going, this is the lane. This is the lane. This is what we're doing. This is how we're doing it. I'm unapologetic about it. This is the delivery of service. And, you know, kind of under the process of Field Way. But I would tell you, I've been able to do that because I started so small, 2018, 2019, in incremental pieces, never taking on too much of a project, too much, you know, loan. I'm, you know, to be able to say debt free and be able to make decisions from that place is entirely different than having to make a decision from, shit, the bank is called and what bill is not getting paid so I can pay a bill today. You know, it's a different position, but
yeah.
Like my dad always said, pigs get fed, hogs get slaughtered. It was like always going to be a really small, steady build for a lifestyle, not necessarily for a lottery scratch off ticket.
And that's it. That's like, it always works that way. Every successful business for the long term, slow and steady, wins the race, period. Yeah. Like there are a couple exceptions, certainly. Nobody's saying, right? But for the most part, the business owners who either know that going in or learn that through I messed up and now, right, are the ones that succeed. Like it's taken me 12 years. I'm not anywhere close to where I want, but it's taken me 12 years and I messed up. I don't know. I still mess up 12 times a day, probably. So, but slow and steady, like I have that pace. I don't want to be the number one anything next week. And I'm sure you don't either, Irene. You want to be number one with what you do, with what your brand fits.
Yeah.
And the consumer will come to you. All right.
Yeah.
We've got 4 minutes left. Anybody have any final thoughts?
I feel like if I ask
I want Connor to tell us what the two markets he thinks are saturated are.
I was going to ask too, but I felt like he would be too afraid to say it online. So I was going to text it.
Say it, Connor. Like you already copped out in the beginning of the show when I asked if you had anything on your plate. So you've already used your one cop out.
Perhaps Zion, and then we're also working in the Austin market, and there's just a lot of activity there. And I don't think either of those markets is necessarily saturated because you have such huge demand generators. Yeah. Like Austin is a massive tourist and business location that people are traveling to. And that outdoor hospitality represents such a small percentage of the accommodation. And then same with Zion. I think it's, 4 million annual visitors, going to Zion. And so again, those people national parks are the best because those are people going for an outdoor experience. And so still, if you look at the percentage of glamping units compared to hotel units available in the Virgin area, it's a small fraction. So there's places where you're seeing, like, Zion's one of the only places where you drive down the road and you're like, oh, there's a glamping business. Like, oh, there's a glamping business. There's another one. So that's the first place where I was like, okay, wow, maybe there is a lot. But those are kind of the only two I can think of.
I got a question for Connor.
I mean, sorry, go ahead, Irene.
Connor, what are you seeing? Like, I guess if you were to give owner operators who are looking to start, as they've worked through and you're consulting for people, the different iterations of accommodations, what are you feeling like is the ultimate accommodation that you would recommend, that you're like, this is where kind of what our recommendation would be?
Apparently we're not done putting Connor on the spot.
Yeah.
So no, it's super interesting.
He's never going to show up for a show again.
So after looking at the data across the glamping industry, the glamping businesses, and then looking at the hip camp data, and looking at the RV data, although that doesn't really count. And then I look at cost, seasonality, and ADR. Like domes are the clear winner every time, shockingly. And there's very few notable businesses. None of the major brands are really using them at this time. So it's really interesting because they represent a very small portion of the glamping units available in the market.
But that's why I think they're successful. We just talked about mediocrity average. So when everybody has domes, it's going to be something new.
Yeah. So that's if I was starting a business right now, I've looked at enough data where I would just feel so compelled to use those, just because every market I look at, or like every data set I look at, it's always in the top 2 or 3 units. And it's most of the time they're super cost effective. They typically can have high R values or can be left up year round. They have high snow ratings, wind ratings. And
that's true. That for sure. Yeah.
So yeah.
I think that's and I think if I want to take a trip down to Zion too sometime. I mean, I have to go. My girlfriend wants to go to Zion and she's never been, but I would love to see how many of those businesses that are all over the place for glamping are mediocre or average or doing something different like Irene. And then again, I think some of those are probably not going to make it as long as they think they are, or they did think they were in 2021, 2022. So, but it's definitely interesting. I think I would love to dive into the saturation. I really appreciate you bringing that up, David. That's a great thought. Just that's kind of the wrong question. And I think there's so much to unpack there. We could probably do a whole show on it. But does anybody have any future or any final thoughts here before we wrap up? We got a couple more seconds.
I just want to clarify. I don't think it's completely the wrong question. I think everyone has to do their homework on supply and demand.
Everybody
but it's always it's a balance. And I think that, like you think about the other thing I'll just add on to what Connor said is that I think like this is kind of a lesson from the hotel industry, I think, is that, sometimes as a hotel investor, you can look at markets and say like, geez, I mean, there are so many hotels that have opened there in the last couple of years. Look at Nashville, for example. But I think you also have to be careful. Sometimes the supply story is kind of like the most interesting thing, but sometimes like it's the second most interesting thing behind the demand story. And like, again, Nashville is a great example for that. The market is completely changed and it needs a lot more hotel rooms. So I think, in this space, I think you have to think about those sorts of questions as well. You can't be completely blind to it, and you can't be I don't think you can have so much hubris as to say, like, what I'm doing is going to be so different that I don't care. I'm indifferent to the competition.
Yeah.
But I do think that I think that it's actually important to have a little bit of hubris in this space, because if you don't think that what you're doing is differentiated to everyone else, like you should probably go like build some apartments or something instead. Like just go play that game of like supply and demand in another industry. I think what makes glamping special is that it, like by definition, the people who have built great businesses in this space have done stuff that is differentiated and kind of like, incomparable to the competition. So I want to clarify. I don't think it's the wrong question, but I think it's not the only question.
And that's it. And admittedly, I've raised it wrong too. So I appreciate the clarification. I think it's just there's a danger with any question, whether it's saturation or marketing or finances or whatever, of stopping with that generic question and not digging into the 10 that are sub questions underneath it.
Right.
Yeah, and I think maybe to build on what you're saying, David, if you could identify that there is a market that's underserved in terms of supply, at least in the short term, it's a lot harder to miss, right? It's a lot harder to mess that up.
Definitely.
But then you could also look at it and say, hey, if I know that I have a differentiated operation like the Fields, I can go into most markets and I'll be in a top operator that creates my own demand and stands out in that market regardless of how much inventory there is. So, yeah.
Yep.
All right. Well, we got to wrap this up. We're already over. I want to take some time to thank our sponsor for the show, Horizon Outdoor Hospitality. I forgot to do it at the beginning again, but I did put up the banner you guys saw in the middle to give them some extra love. So hopefully they'll forgive me for that. But super excited to have them as a sponsor for the glamping episode. If you guys are interested in management services, consulting, things like that, Scott Foos and his team are a great company. But thank you guys. Appreciate you joining us again. Irene, David, Connor. Super exciting to learn about Romania. And I'd love to have more of those guests on. So grateful to our team for booking those people. And we will see you all next week on another episode. Take care, guys.
Good to see you guys. Take care.
Thanks. See you guys.
Thanks for watching this episode of MC Fireside Chats, hosted by Brian Searl and Kara Sismadia. Have a suggestion for a future show or want to see your campground or company as part of an episode? Email us at hello@moderncampground.com. Join us next week for another episode. And don't miss the latest outdoor hospitality news and commentary from around the world at moderncampground.com.